It was an ordinary Thursday morning when Gabrielle Jones, the CEO of one of the fastest growing tech companies in the nation, stepped off her private jet at Los Angeles International Airport, ready to attend an important meeting with international investors. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the terminal, but Gabrielle didn't notice the beauty of the day. Her mind was preoccupied with the business dealings that awaited her, the strategic decisions that could determine the next phase of her company's growth. She had built her company from the ground up, and the thought of potentially securing this deal felt like a monumental step. Yet the journey to the terminal was not just about business, it was about something deeper, something Gabrielle had not anticipated. As Gabrielle made her way through the busy airport, she felt the usual hum of travel in the air. The sound of wheels rolling over polished floors, the hushed murmur of passengers in waiting areas, and the crisp announcements made over the intercom. Nothing was out of the ordinary as she approached the gate where passengers were being processed. The usual airport hustle surrounded her, but something felt off. A young airport agent stood behind the counter, the kind of person Gabrielle had seen countless times, disinterested and seemingly absorbed in whatever thoughts distracted her from the flow of travelers. The agent glanced at Gabrielle as she stepped up to the counter, but there was no immediate warmth in her eyes. The agent's focus shifted from Gabrielle's face to her hands, as if searching for a place to rest her gaze. "Name, please," the agent asked, her voice flat and tired. Gabrielle gave her name in the usual calm and composed tone she had perfected over the years. Gabrielle Jones. At that moment, the agent's eyes shifted, narrowing slightly. Gabrielle could feel a subtle shift in the air, something off. Then, without any warning, the agent mimicked Gabrielle's accent in a mocking way, elongating her words for effect. The agent's lips curled in a small, almost imperceptible sneer, and she repeated the name in a distorted imitation of Gabrielle's voice. "Gabrielle Juwons," she enunciated, dragging the words out with exaggerated slowness. The words hit Gabrielle like a slap. Her body froze for a moment, and a wave of disbelief washed over her. She had heard slights before, subtle jabs and comments that seemed to bounce off her, but this felt different. This was not a simple misunderstanding or an accident. This was deliberate mockery. Gabrielle's breath caught in her throat, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, steadying herself. She had built her reputation on staying calm under pressure, navigating the complexities of the business world with an intellectual grace that few could match. But no amount of training or experience could have prepared her for this particular moment, the moment when her race and her accent became the subject of ridicule. The agent's eyes narrowed further as Gabrielle began to speak, her words clear and unwavering. "Excuse me," Gabrielle said, her voice controlled despite the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor." The agent rolled her eyes as if this was a trivial inconvenience and grudgingly handed Gabrielle the phone. A few moments later, Gabrielle found herself speaking with the supervisor, a man whose tone was polite but dispassionate. His words were full of corporate niceties meant to soothe, but Gabrielle could tell they were empty. He promised to investigate the incident, but Gabrielle could sense there was no real concern behind his words, just the hollow repetition of a script designed to placate. Gabrielle's mind began to race. She had been in situations like this before, where a person's behavior made her uncomfortable, where her race became the topic of unwanted conversation, but she had always let it slide. She knew that calling attention to it could be seen as making a scene, as disrupting the smooth flow of business. She had learned to swallow her frustrations, to play along and remain silent for the sake of her career. But today was different. She had reached a breaking point. She had worked hard, fought battles both internal and external to get where she was. And yet, here she was being mocked for something that had no bearing on her worth, her abilities, or her success. She realized she couldn't let it slide this time, not when so many people, especially people of color, were still subjected to the same disrespect in countless small, unnoticed moments. As Gabrielle walked away from the counter, the anger in her chest began to shift into something else, something purposeful. She was no longer just another traveler, quietly tolerating the slights that came her way. She was Gabrielle Jones, a CEO who had worked tirelessly to build an empire from nothing, and she would not let this moment pass without making a statement. She was done being silent. Her phone buzzed in her hand as she typed a quick tweet. If you've ever been mocked for your accent or treated as less than because of the way you speak, it's time to stand up. The era of silence is over. Hashtag stop the mockery, hashtag speak up. It wasn't a moment of rage, but of resolve. Gabrielle knew this wasn't just about the agent. This was about something bigger, a systemic issue that affected millions of people every day. It was time for a change, and Gabrielle was going to be the one to make that change. She pressed send and took a deep breath. In that instant, she knew that the decision she had made to speak up, to no longer remain silent, was the beginning of something much larger. It was a ripple in the water, one that would soon become a tidal wave. As Gabrielle walked through the terminal toward her gate, she no longer felt the weight of the incident. She felt the weight of what she was about to do. She was no longer just a CEO navigating her company's success. She was a leader who understood the power of words and how those words, when used to speak truth, could change the world. This was just the beginning. As Gabrielle stepped out of the airport, her heart was still pounding from the interaction that had just taken place. She could feel the weight of what had happened, but she knew that this moment could not just be another brush-off incident in her long career. It had to mean something bigger, something that could be a catalyst for real change. With one steadying breath, Gabrielle pulled out her phone, opened her Twitter app, and began typing. If you've ever been mocked for your accent or treated as less than because of the way you speak, it's time to stand up. The era of silence is over. Hashtag stop the mockery, hashtag speak up. She hit send and felt the click of the moment that would change everything. Gabrielle had anticipated a few responses here and there, maybe a couple of likes or retweets. What she didn't expect was the flood of support that poured in almost immediately. Her phone buzzed incessantly, one notification after another, as her tweet began circulating far beyond her own circle. The world was listening. Thousands of people from all walks of life rallied behind her, sharing their own stories of discrimination, mocking, and microaggressions they had faced because of their accents, appearances, or identities. In just a few hours, the tweet had gone viral. As Gabrielle scrolled through the comments and retweets, she could hardly believe the wave of solidarity flooding her feed. Some of the most influential people in the world, from top CEOs to celebrities and activists, amplified her message. The hashtag Stop the Mockery trended, and with it, a renewed call to action against all forms of racial and cultural disrespect. Gabrielle's words had struck a chord, reverberating far beyond the walls of LAX. What started as one woman standing up for herself had quickly turned into a national movement. But the ripple of Gabrielle's tweet didn't stop there. The airport chain, which prided itself on its exceptional customer service, began receiving backlash from all corners of the globe. Passengers who had experienced similar mistreatment began speaking out, sharing their own stories of having been ridiculed or disregarded by airport staff. Social media platforms exploded with video clips, testimonials, and even photos from people who had faced similar humiliations, many of them in airports around the world. The hashtag Stop the Mockery became a cry for justice, a call to hold accountable not just the individual agent, but an entire system of ignorance that allowed this kind of behavior to flourish unchecked. As the hours turned into days, the media caught on. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as yet another example of how deep-seated bias still affected people on a daily basis. The mainstream coverage turned Gabrielle's experience into a conversation about racism, prejudice, and the insidious nature of microaggressions that too many had silently tolerated for far too long. Gabrielle's name began to trend worldwide. Her quiet strength and resolve became a symbol of resilience, a rallying point for all those who had been marginalized and silenced for speaking in a way that didn't fit the dominant mold. However, as the momentum of the story grew, So did the pressure on the airport company. A few days after the incident, the company's public relations team reached out to Gabrielle, offering a public apology. Their statement was predictably polished and filled with all the right words. "We deeply regret any inconvenience caused to Ms. Jones." The statement read, "We are committed to providing the highest level of customer service, and we will be taking immediate steps to address this issue." But Gabrielle wasn't interested in just a statement of regret. Words without action meant nothing. A simple apology would not erase the systemic nature of the issue. Gabrielle knew she had the power, not only as a successful CEO, but as a leader who had the platform to create real, lasting change. This was not the time for forgiveness or for letting the company off the hook. She had the responsibility to hold them accountable. In a bold move that would send ripples through the business world, Gabrielle announced that she was withdrawing a multi-million-dollar partnership with the airport company. The deal, worth approximately $950 million, had been in place for several years, and her decision to sever ties was a public statement of her values. This wasn't just about her personal experience. It was about her unwillingness to do business with a company that allowed such blatant disrespect to continue. The message was clear. If the airport could not respect her, then she would not continue to enrich them with her business. The news hit the media like a bombshell. Investors, already on edge due to the negative press surrounding the company, scrambled to understand the full implications of Gabrielle's decision. How could a high-profile CEO, one whose reputation was built on integrity and success, walk away from nearly $1 billion deal? What did this mean for the airport chain's future? The company's stock dropped significantly, and financial analysts were quick to point out that this was not just a personal affront to Gabrielle, it was a financial and reputational crisis. But Gabrielle remained unshaken. She wasn't interested in negotiating her values. To her, this wasn't just about the money, it was about what she stood for. She had the power to make a stand, and she wasn't going back down. As the days went by, the story continued to evolve. Gabrielle's company, once primarily focused on tech innovation, found itself at the center of a cultural and business movement. The support for her decision to stand firm against the airport chain grew even stronger. New investors approached her, eager to work with a leader who had demonstrated such unwavering courage. Partnerships started flooding in, many of them from companies that admired Gabrielle's integrity and wanted to align themselves with someone who was making a real impact. As the weeks passed, the story of Gabrielle Jones continued to resonate across industries. She had become more than just a successful businesswoman. She had become a symbol of change. Her actions, driven by a simple act of standing up for herself, had triggered a larger conversation about race, power, and the courage to speak out. Gabrielle had shown the world that sometimes the smallest actions could create the biggest waves. Her company, once defined by technology and innovation, now stood as a beacon of integrity and social responsibility. Gabrielle had reshaped the business world, not just through her cutting-edge products and services, but by forcing an industry-wide conversation about respect, equity, and the power of standing up for what's right. Through it all, Gabrielle's strength remained unshaken. She had taken something that was deeply personal, hurtful, demeaning interaction, and transformed it into a movement that would forever change the conversation around race and equality in the business world. And as the movement continued to grow, so did Gabrielle's influence. What started with one woman speaking out against mockery and prejudice had blossomed into something larger than anyone could have imagined. And through it all, Gabrielle remained at the helm, proving that sometimes the biggest change begins with a single unwavering voice. As Gabrielle's story continues to inspire countless others, it serves as a powerful reminder that each of us has the ability to stand up, speak out, and make a difference. The ripple effect of her decision to call out injustice not only reshaped an industry, but also ignited a movement of solidarity and change. It's time for all of us to recognize the power we hold and take action, whether it's speaking up against microaggressions or challenging the systems that allow them to persist. Let Gabrielle's story be a catalyst for you to find your own voice. For more powerful stories that challenge the status quo and inspire change, make sure to follow Expect Stories. Stay connected, be part of the conversation, and share your voice with the world.